Welcome back, pups, to Chapter 4 of The One They Call Broccoli, written by Texiliaz. I'm so excited to continue sharing this fic with y'all. So, let's jump on into it. Chapter 4 A Trip to UA. Summary: Izuku gets injured during training, and, with no other choice, his mentors bring him to UA to get him healed. Notes: Hello, everyone! First of all, this chapter just ran away with the word count and got super long, so I had to cut it in half. Anyway, hope you enjoy this chapter. Trigger warnings: mentions of emotional and economic abuse, child neglect, and injuries. Izuku's point of view. There were about 3 months left until the entrance exam. And honestly, the fact that Izuku had managed to get this far without any major injuries was a miracle. But of course, his luck would eventually run out. It was early in the morning, and Izuku was finishing up his round of cleaning the beach when it happened. While carrying an old TV, one of those really thick ones, his grip slipped and he dropped it. And of course, it landed right on his foot. His worn out shoes and the soft sand under him did very little to ease the fall, and it connected with his foot with a loud and painful crack. Immediately, Izuku doubled over in searing pain, screaming out. Aizawa and All Might were quick by his side, and they helped move the heavy TV away from him. Shit. Hey, kiddo, are you okay? Aizawa asked, crouching down next to him and gripping his shoulder tightly. Izuku just shook his head, tears running down his face. I think it's broken, he sobbed, whimpering when he tried to move his foot only for it to explode in agonizing pain. How will I continue the training now? Aizawa and All Might looked at each other, considering something. Then All Might sighed and crouched down on Izuku's other side. It's gonna be all right, my boy. We know someone at UA who can help you, he said gently, gripping Izuku's other shoulder. Really? Izuku sniffled, looking up at All Might through tear-filled eyes. Aizawa was the one who answered, giving his shoulder a firm squeeze. Yes, really, but you'll probably not be able to attend school afterwards. Her quirk drains a lot of stamina. Aizawa sighed. Do you want us to give your parents a call so they can inform your school about this? At that question, Izuku froze and he cursed himself when he realized that both Aizawa and All Might had probably noticed. No, that's okay. I can call in sick myself. We are allowed to do that, Izuku lied, ducking his head and keeping his eyes on the ground. They were not, in fact, allowed to do that. He'd just not call the school and take that mark. The school wrote him up for a bunch of other things he didn't even do anyway, so it wasn't like he had a spotless record to begin with. He could feel the distrust from the two heroes when he glanced up at Aizawa. The man's whole face seemed to just scream, I call bullshit. Izuku swallowed and looked down again, avoiding his gaze. It was All Might who broke the silence. The blonde cleared his throat, gaining Izuku's and Aizawa's attention. Well, if you say so, my boy, he said carefully, before moving to stand up. Then I suggest we get going before classes at UA start, All Might continued, but then turned to look at Aizawa uncertainly. Aizawa, should you or I... Izuku wasn't sure what he was asking, and he just looked between them, confused. That was until Aizawa sighed next to him and answered, It's fine. I'll carry him. I'll carry him. You have your time limit to think about, after all. Better save it in case of an emergency. He paused and turned to look at Izuku. If that's okay with you, kid? Izuku felt himself blush, feeling embarrassed at having to be carried around like a small child. But then again, he couldn't exactly walk to UA like this. So, with a face that was on fire and eyes firmly locked down on the sand, he nodded. Aizawa moved so he was crouching in front of him, his back turned towards Izuku. Think you can climb up? The man asked, hands reaching back for Izuku to climb on. Moving around or putting any weight on his foot hurt like this hurt. Like Shota would say, like hell. But with some help from All Might, Izuku managed to somehow climb up on the other hero's back. He weakly grabbed onto Aizawa's shoulders and ducked his face to hide it against Aizawa's capture weapon, feeling embarrassed. "Are you all right, my boy?" All Might asked next to him. "Fine," Izuku croaked out and ducked his head further. He was 14, for crying out loud. He was way too old to be carried around like a baby, though he guessed he'd been carried by Shota many times before this. Just this morning, his dad had lifted him up and carried him around the apartment. There wasn't even any reason for him to be carried most of the time. Shota just seemed to like carrying Broccoli, and Broccoli liked being carried. But that was when he was a cat and not a human. Now that I think about it, when was the last time someone carried me in my human form? Izuku tried to remember the last time his mom had held him, but he just came up with a blank. It was probably before I was diagnosed quirkless, he realized, and he quickly shook that thought away. It didn't matter anymore. Izuku was fine. He had Shota and Toshi now. He is fine. Though, when they started walking towards View A, Izuku couldn't help but feel a bit bad. Because surely the trip would have been easier on Aizawa if Izuku just turned into his smaller cat form. Swallowing his guilt, Izuku stubbornly stayed in his current form, keeping his head low. Sometimes he would glance up, only to immediately duck his head again and try not to blush when he caught glimpses of people walking by them, giggling and pointing. He thought he even heard a few comments about cute dads and their child. If only, Izuku found himself thinking, gripping the man's shoulders tighter. They reached UA, and despite the embarrassing circumstances, Izuku couldn't help but be starstruck as he took in the tall building. He hadn't even noticed he had been leaning back to get a better look until he felt a hand on his back, steadying him. "Careful, my boy," All Might chuckled. Sorry," he mumbled. "First time at UA?" All Might asked, smiling at him. Izuku nodded and looked up at the building again with a giant grin. He heard All Might chuckle. "Well, I can't blame you. It is quite an impressive sight." "Not impressive enough that it's worth getting a concussion over, so try not to fall off," Aizawa grunted while walking them over to the gate. Yes, sir," Izuku answered quietly, forcing himself to look away from the building and instead looked down at what Aizawa was doing in front of them. The man tapped a card against the panel by the gate and pressed a few buttons. "Usually guests aren't allowed in here, but if they were accompanied by a member of staff, they are allowed to enter," he explained. Almost as soon as Aizawa said that, the panel beeped and a neon green image of a waving Nezu showed up. Izuku couldn't help but grin at the sight, especially when he noticed Aizawa roll his eyes at the image. And with that, they walked through the gate without any trouble. And Izuku was officially on UA school grounds. It was still early morning, and the hallways were mostly empty. Classes weren't about to start for another half hour, but there were a few students trickling in and moving around. Most kept their distance when they saw them, probably because of the scowl on Aizawa's face. From what Izuku had gathered over the years, the students seemed to really respect Aizawa. But that apparently didn't stop them from still giving the odd trio curious looks. Most ignored the sim form of Toshi and instead focused on Aizawa carrying Izuku on his back. "Hey, isn't that Aizawa-sensei? Who's the kid? Did you know he had a child? I didn't even know he had a partner. Wait, then does that mean that blonde guy is his boyfriend?" Seemingly having had enough, Aizawa turned around and gave the students a hard glare, quirk fully activated and all. The sight made them all immediately yelp and scramble away, letting out terrified sorries. Red eyes briefly met Izuku's own, and the boy found himself frozen in place. In all the years Izuku had lived with the two, Shota had never tried to use his quirk on him. But Izuku couldn't deny he had thought about it. For years he'd wondered how Eraserhead's quirk would affect him. He held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest as he waited for his whole life to crash down on him. But, to his utter relief, those red eyes only widened slightly before they quickly turned away without anything happening. Izuku felt himself let out a deep sigh of relief when Aizawa deactivated his quirk. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you, Aizawa muttered, and continued to walk. Oh, it's okay, Izuku answered, too lost in his own thoughts to really hear what the man was saying. So it doesn't do anything when I'm in human form. Or is it because I just changed it a couple hours ago? What would happen if he used it when I was a cat, or was running out of time, or perhaps was already over my limit? The thought of Shota trying to use his quirk on Broccoli and Izuku turning back into a human made his stomach turn. Hopefully he'll never try that and we won't find out. They soon reached what he assumed was the nurse's office. And of course, being such a hero fan, Izuku had his suspicions from the start just who they were about to meet. But that didn't make it any less exciting. Let's just hope she's here, All Might mumbled, knocking on the door. A friendly "come in" came from the other side of the door, and the three stepped inside. All of the preparation in the world wouldn't have been enough for Izuku to not freak out at the sight of the elderly hero. And despite the pain he was in, he grinned widely, almost shaking in excitement. Sorry to bother you, Recovery Girl! Aizawa flinched at Izuku's sudden loud shriek right next to his ear, muttering something about loud brats. Izuku blushed and felt himself shrink back. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell. I'm a huge fan, and it's really exciting to, meet you, he said, suddenly feeling very shy. Recovery Girl just smiled at him kindly. My, I certainly wasn't expecting to meet a fan here today. Don't worry, dearie. Now, I'm guessing there is a reason for this visit? All Might stepped forward, gesturing towards Izuku. Yes. You see, young Midoriya here got injured during training and hurt his foot. We think it might be broken. Could you heal him, please? All Might asked. For some reason, he looked very nervous. Is he scared of her? Izuku wondered, frowning as he kept looking between his mentor and the small, elderly hero. Why? Recovery Girl stared up at All Might for a while, then looked over at Izuku, who was still held up by Aizawa. Training, you say? She said quietly, a glint in her eyes as she seemed to study Izuku. But then she shook her head and smiled at them. Never mind. Of course, I'll heal him. Aizawa, would you be a dearie and place him on the bed so I can get a look at him? Aizawa nodded and moved to one of the beds. He carefully crouched so Izuku could sit down without hurting his foot any further. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said, smiling up at him gratefully when the man stood back up and stepped away. Don't worry about it, kiddo, Shota answered with a grunt, leaning back against the wall and crossing his arms. In typical Shota fashion, Izuku's mind added, and he had to bite back a snort. All right, dearie, let's check on the damage, shall we? Even though the nurse was gentle, Izuku still hissed when she pulled off his shoe, along with his now bloody sock. Izuku looked down at the shoe and sock sadly. Good thing my shoes are already red, he thought dryly. A sock he could always afford losing, though he was starting to run out of them. But he really didn't know what to do once he couldn't use his shoes anymore. Recovery Girl's sigh broke him out of his thoughts, and he glanced up at her. Oh my, that is indeed broken, I'm afraid. I'm gonna heal it, but it will drain you of a lot of stamina. You will probably sleep for a few hours, she explained, and Izuku nodded. He'd already been told that once, after all. Recovery Girl then turned to look at the other two in the room. That being said, have any of you informed the boys' school and parents about this? Izuku grimaced at that, and before either All Might or Aizawa could answer, he cut in. It's fine. I'll handle it later. There was a sigh, and suddenly a phone was thrust in front of his face. Izuku blinked at it in confusion before he looked up, meeting the eyes of Aizawa. You said they let you call in sick by yourself, Aizawa said, his tone challenging as he stared down at him. Izuku gulped. I have my own phone, he stammered, reaching into the pocket of his tracksuit and pulling out his phone. Should I mean, right now? All Might was the one who answered. It would probably be best to inform them as soon as possible, he said gently. The man kept glancing at him and giving him concerned looks, and Izuku didn't like it. He hated seeing Toshi wear that expression. So, deciding to just get it over with, if only to ease some of his dad's worry, Izuku opened his contacts. Thankfully, one of his few contacts was for his school. With his heart beating in his chest, Izuku clicked on it and pressed the call button, putting the phone to his ear. Aldera Middle School, answered the monotone voice of the receptionist. Hi, this is Midori Izuku from class 3B. I, was kind of in an accident, and I'd like to call in sick for today, he stammered, ducking his head and avoiding the looks from the three adults in the room. Kid, you can't be serious. Okay, thank you, bye, he said, quickly hanging up and putting away his phone. It was completely silent after that, and he pointedly did not look at anyone else, keeping his eyes firmly on the floor. He noticed his hands were shaking, and he clenched them into fists on top of his lap, gripping the fabric of his tracksuit tightly. Aizawa took a small step closer to him and started saying something, but Izuku didn't let him. Could you heal me now, please? Izuku asked quietly, looking up at Recovery Girl with pleading eyes. The nurse was looking at him with worry, and Izuku hated it. He hadn't even known her for more than 10 minutes, and he already messed everything up. His chest and throat clenched up, and he bit his lip, willing his rapid heartbeat to calm down. After another moment of silence, Recovery Girl gave a deep sigh. Of course, dearie. Why don't you lie down? She answered gently, like he was a frightened animal, before guiding him to lie down and using her quirk on him. Almost immediately, Izuku felt completely exhausted. It was a good thing that he was already lying down, or he would have surely collapsed. Before everything faded to black, he swore he could hear the gentle voice of Toshi. Just rest for now, my boy. We'll come and get you in a few hours. Recovery Girl, or otherwise known as Chiyo, point of view. As soon as Chiyo was sure that the kid was asleep, she turned to the other two heroes in the room. So, would anyone care to fill me in? She asked sternly, looking between them. Yagi looked extremely guilty, and she just knew that this tiny and sweet boy was who he had chosen as his successor. But judging on how the man kept worryingly glancing at Aizawa, Chiyo chose not to bring it up for now. Although she didn't agree on keeping the truth about his quirk a secret from his husband for so long, she also wouldn't be the one to bring it up in front of him. Surprisingly, the one who answered her question wasn't Yagi, but rather Aizawa. The kid wants to get into UA. We've been training him for months. Training went bad today, and he dropped a TV on his foot. You can ask this idiot why he was carrying a TV in the first place. He sighed, nodding his head towards Yagi. That made her eyes widen, and she gave Yagi a bewildered look. They are both training him to be All Might's successor? And the doof still hasn't told him about One for All? Oh, she had some choice words for Yagi later, all right. But for now, she had to focus on the problem at hand, namely, this very obviously distressed kid sleeping in her office. And what about that call to his school? She asked, moving to sit down at her desk. Yagi and Aizawa glanced at each other, both looking upset. Again, Aizawa was the one who answered. Honestly, I have no idea. I had hoped he would have gotten cold feet and finally talked to us. I didn't think he would actually call them. Aizawa groaned, dragging a frustrated hand through his hair. We've been having some concerns surrounding young Midoriya's home life. We suspect that's why he'd rather not call his parents about any of this, Yagi said sadly. Chiyo frowned at that. You think he's being abused? She asked, drumming her fingers against her cane. Aizawa answered with a firm, definitely. No bruises that I've been able to see, but we've noticed clear signs of distress and neglect, he muttered, crossing his arms. Yagi glanced at Aizawa and put a comforting hand on his shoulder before he turned to look at Chiyo. We've, been trying to look for any proof of abuse or neglect, but so far it's been rather unsuccessful. From what we've gathered, his mom has a clean record and his dad is out of the picture, but still provides for them financially. We've tried making worried claims against them, but every time they get sent back with nothing to report," Aizawa said, gritting his teeth in annoyance. Chio hummed sadly at that. In a perfect world, finding no evidence would be a good thing, and meaning there wasn't anything going on. Unfortunately, that was often not the case. No evidence, more often than not, just meant it was well hidden. But it was still strange, though, how worked up these two were over this. She looked at them, taking in their worried expressions and tense postures. They both not so discreetly would glance at Midoriya. They almost looked like worried parents, and that's when it clicked. "Hold on, you're not thinking about taking custody of this lad, are you?" she asked, barely believing what she was seeing. She would have expected this from Yagi, but Aizawa Shoda, Mr. Don't Get Attached, was actually considering fostering or even adopting a teen? Aizawa just shrugged. "He's a good kid," he said simply, hiding his face in a scarf and looking at the boy with something close to pride in his eyes. Yagi smiled next to him and nodded in agreement. Chio put a hand to her forehead and sighed deeply. "Oh dear, Yagi, what have you gotten yourself into?" They were interrupted by the sound of the school bell ringing, indicating the start of homeroom. With a sigh, Aizawa moved away from the wall he had been leaning against and headed to the door. "Well, that's my cue. Will you stay with him?" he asked, looking at Yagi. "Of course," Yagi answered with a bright smile, already moving to sit down next to the bed. With one last, rare smile, Aizawa walked out and Chio was alone with Yagi, except for the heavily sleeping kid next to them. Chio didn't waste a second in bringing her staff down on top of the number one hero idiot's head, hitting him hard enough to make him yelp. "Yagi, you absolute fool! Explain everything now, or I am calling Gran Torino," she threatened, glaring at him. Yagi rubbed the top of his head with a pout. "Was that really necessary?" he asked, making Chio huff. "Considering you apparently have decided to bring Aizawa, your own husband of several years, into training a kid to inherit your insane power without his knowledge? Yes, that was necessary. Honestly, Yagi, what are you thinking?" she scolded, having stood up from her desk chair to pace around the room. "You know why keeping One for All a secret is important," Yagi hissed. Though, by the way he was avoiding her gaze, it was clear he was at least feeling guilty about this. "I understand keeping it a secret from the public, but why you've decided to keep quiet from Aizawa all these years I will never understand," she sighed, shaking her head. She moved to sit down again. "At least tell me the boy's quirk is something similar so the change won't be too obvious." Yagi didn't answer. Instead, he just hunched his shoulders and shrinked back. Chio squinted her eyes at him. "Yagi, please tell me his quirk is at least a tiny bit similar to yours." The man was visibly sweating at this point. He pulled at the collar of his shirt. "Well, see, young Midoriya is, how do you say it? He's, quirkless?" he said quietly, the last word barely audible. Chio smacked Yagi on top of his head. Again. Hard. Izuku point of view. He woke up feeling dizzy and disoriented. "Ah, my boy, you're awake. How are you feeling?" The sound of Toshi had Izuku sitting up, and he put a hand to his head when everything spun around him. "Oh, okay, I have hands. At least I'm still in human form." He looked over at Toshi, only to furrow his brow in confusion. "All Might, why are you also laying in one of the beds?" he asked, scanning the man for any injuries where he laid in the bed next to his own. Don't worry about that, young Midoriya. I was just feeling a bit dizzy is all," All Might answered with a chuckle. "Anyway, how are you feeling? Think you're ready to head out?" the man asked, sitting up too. "I'm fine," Izuku answered. He then looked around the room. "Where's Recovery Girl? How long was I out?" he asked, noticing the sun shining brightly through the window. For some reason, All Might flinched at the mention of Recovery Girl, but he seemed to quickly recover. She had some errands to run around the school, and you've been asleep for a few hours. It's already past noon, he answered. Anyway, what do you say we head out of here? All Might then suggested, already on the way over to the door, seemingly eager to get out. Ah, right, Izuku called out, getting up to follow him. He moved to put on his shoes, and froze when he noticed they had been cleaned and a new pair of socks were laying on top of them. Young Midoriya? All Might said worriedly, taking a step closer to him. Izuku quickly wiped away the tears before they could fall and put on the socks and shoes, smiling at All Might brightly. I'm fine. Let's go. They headed out of the nurse's office and walked through the hallways. While walking, All Might eagerly pointed out different rooms and explained how, starting the next semester, he would be teaching heroics at UA. Izuku just smiled and nodded along, acting like he was hearing it for the first time and asking questions at appropriate times. He already knew about all of this after all, having been present during many conversations between Shota, Toshi, and Nezu at home. And when you speak of the devil, further down the hallway, Izuku saw a very familiar figure walking towards them. And as soon as their eyes met, Izuku froze, and the Nezu's eyes widened just a tiny fraction, recognition shining through his eyes. Oh no. Author's notes. Dun dun dun! What a cliffhanger, huh? So sorry for cutting it there. Next chapter we'll get more of Nezu, I swear. Hope you liked this chapter, even with the lack of broccoli. We'll see more of our little green bean in the future, I promise, lol. Anyway, thank you all so much for all the support and lovely comments. I am so happy that so many people seem to enjoy this story so far. Next chapter is almost completely done and will probably be up in a day or two. Hope you look forward to it and have a wonderful day. Edit! This story has fan art now! Thank you, Jorgie Punk, for making it. And then there's a link to the fan art. And that is the end of chapter 4. Sorry for the desk squeaking. Can't really control that. Sorry for all the mess ups. I guess I'm a little thirsty. I need to go get some water. But also that long pause, like when All Might and Chio were talking right before Izuku's point of view, there's just like dots and quotation marks. So I thought, hey, just a long stretch of silence. Comedic timing. It felt awkward, but hopefully it comes across as comedic. So chapter 5 is going to be posted tomorrow, chapter 6 Sunday, and chapter 7 Monday, and hopefully I'll continue with the daily posts like that. I don't know how long that'll be kept up for, but hopefully it's all good. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Go show Texiliaz some love. The link to the fic is in the description, as I said it. I didn't actually say it this time. But yeah, the link to the fic is in the description. Please go show the author, Texiliaz, some love. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye, pups!